All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Sam Belknap, and I'm a Senior Community Development Officer at the Island Institute that oversees our blue economy work as well as our climate solutions work. And I'm thrilled to spend the evening with you tonight talking about the superpowers of seaweed. So while we're beginning, I'm so thrilled to have you all here tonight joining us for this virtual discussion about the Superpowers of Seaweed film. Wonderful that we can all get together. We have some wonderful panelists that will help us learn more about the superpowers of seaweed and the role that it can play in dealing with climate change, both here in Maine and also elsewhere in the world. So a little bit about the Island Institute's work. We were founded in 1983 and are a community development organization that is as a nonprofit community development organization. We're based in Rockland, Maine. We have more than 50 full-time staff and serve more than 150 coastal and island communities, including the 15 unbridged islands that have year-round populations. We are committed to taking a networked approach and working with our partners across the country and with our supporters. And we're hard at work at addressing some of the toughest challenges facing Maine's communities now. We're focusing on empowering strong leaders, developing climate solutions, and creating a resilient economy for the coast and the state as a whole. Now, without further delay, I'd like to welcome our amazing panelists, three of my favorite people working on the coast of Maine, and ask them to turn on their video and turn on their microphones. So welcome Nichole, Bree, and Susie. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this conversation to discuss the superpowers of seaweed. Starting with you, Nichole, I'd love it if you'd each take a moment to introduce yourselves, your role, and how long you've been working with seaweed. So we'll go Nichole, Bree, and then Susie.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, can hear you fine, thank you.
So my name is Nichole Price. I'm a senior research scientist at the Bigelow Lab for Ocean Sciences in East Booth Bay, Maine. There I direct our Center for Seafood Solutions, and I also have recently been given the title of Professor of Environmental Studies at Colby College. And my background is in benthic marine ecology in both tropical and temperate systems, and I've been studying aspects of seaweed since I started my dissertation back in 2002, so quite some time now.
Great, thank you so much, Nichole. Bree.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bree Warner. I'm the CEO and president of Atlantic Sea Farms, a kelp company based in southern Maine.
I'll take it from there, Bree. My name is Susie Arnold. I am a marine scientist at the Island Institute. Like Nichole, I'm trained as a benthic marine ecologist and have been looking at various aspects of seaweed since my graduate school days. But I've been at the Island Institute for 9 years. And while there, I've been focused on Maine seaweeds for about 6 of those years.
Wonderful. Thank you all
so
so
I
much.
can answer the second half of the question. I'm sorry. I was about to be a naked baby that walked through and I didn't feel like that needed to come on. I've been working at Atlantic Sea Farms for about 3 years now, but my background is not in science or seaweed. It's in economic development. And if we're talking about the superpowers of seaweed, I feel like one of the big superpowers is economic development.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Bree. So thank you again all for joining us and following up this discussion on the amazing film that everyone in the audience, I hope, has had a chance to watch before joining us. But if not, I encourage them to watch it immediately after. It's such a wonderful film highlighting the superpowers of seaweed. So we're going to kick things off with a couple questions to our panelists before opening it up to the public for questions. So Susie, starting with you. Now, most people know that the Island Institute is working to mitigate and adapt to climate change, but why is the Institute prioritizing the type of research and the partnerships that are highlighted in this film?
Great question, Sam. I get that type of question a lot. So to some people, it seems strange that there's a marine scientist working at a community development organization, but I'll just provide a little bit of context. We know that about 85% of landings of Maine's fisheries come from shell producing species. So including lobsters, clams, scallops, urchins, oysters, etc. We also know that our coastal communities are heavily dependent upon these species. So the lobster industry alone is about a $1.5 billion industry. And so our communities are very dependent upon these shell building species. We also know, starting in around 2014, we heard rumblings, I guess, of concern around ocean acidification. And we knew at the time that ocean acidification impacted shell building species, but we didn't really have a good understanding of how it impacted the coast of Maine and the commercial fisheries that we depend on here in Maine. So around 2014, 2015, during the LePage administration, there was a kind of outcrying of concern from the fishing industry that we need to understand this threat much better than we do. And so as a result, a commission was formed by the legislature, and a study commission studied basically the science of what is known and what is not known about ocean acidification in Maine. So basically it was determined that we have this environmental susceptibility to acidification in Maine. And because of this heavy dependence on shell builders, we also have this economic susceptibility or vulnerability to the process of acidification and its impacts. So around the same time, Bree and I were colleagues at the Institute. She was our economic development director and was working on starting an aquaculture business development program, for the most part with fishermen or people who make their livings off of the water, to diversify their marine livelihoods into shellfish and seaweed aquaculture. And so we began hearing some concern from the fishermen who were participants in the program and other fishermen who were just following the latest science, that they were concerned about diversifying into a business that involved another shell builder. So for example, if they were, a lobster fisherman and they were going to start an oyster farm, why would they want to diversify into another marine livelihood that was also based on a species that could be impacted by ocean acidification? So I thought that was a very important point. And the type of research that we do at the Island Institute is, number one, is very industry relevant. And so we felt responsible to investigate that question. Could there be a local remediation strategy for people who are getting into shellfish aquaculture? Around that time, as was displayed in the movie, Nichole was starting out at Bigelow, and we knew each other from graduate school. And there was a lot of conversation amongst the scientific community about this concept of phytoremediation. And so there's a number of pairings that we could have investigated. We could have investigated rockweed and how it photosynthesizes and potentially could remediate local waters from acidification around oyster farms, or like Nichole has done some work, whether eelgrass has the potential to improve ocean chemistry, and then what in turn could those positive impacts be on soft shell clams. But we decided to focus on kelp because of the burgeoning industry, and the species that made the most sense to study along with kelp was aquacultured mussels. And so essentially, we do what the Island Institute does well, was we partnered with the appropriate folks in the academic world and in the industry world. And so at the time, we partnered with Ocean Approved, which is now Atlantic Sea Farms, the company that Bree runs, Bigelow and University of New Hampshire, to basically study whether these kelp farms, through the process of photosynthesis, could improve the local, the seawater, the chemistry of their local seawaters, and then have positive impacts on mussels. In short, I know I'm going on here, but so in short, we wanted to basically give these mussel farmers a possible climate resiliency strategy in the future if the Gulf of Maine was to the point that mussels are having a hard time having thick enough shells, or their abyssal threads were becoming weakened because of acidification, that there could be this local remediation strategy that they could employ around their farms to have their businesses be sustainable in the face of climate change.
Great, thank you so much, Susie. So Nichole, the film does a wonderful job of highlighting the ocean acidification and remediation benefits of kelp farming. But what are some of the other superpowers of seaweed?
Thanks for that question. It's a great one. I wanted to first start by just echoing Susie that the important part of this research is the partnerships, and it's been a joy to partner with Island Institute and with Atlantic Sea Farms, formerly Ocean Approved, on this research and some of the other pieces of research that I'll mention in my answer to this question. So we've discovered this remediation effect in Maine we are taking that research beyond Maine and asking the same question now in Alaskan waters and in Norwegian waters as well. But we've come up with a whole series of other questions in the course of this research that we're starting to answer. One thing that we're curious about is the ability of farmed seaweeds to act as a sponge for nutrients that can act to exacerbate the ocean acidification problem or just cause harmful blooms that are unwanted blooms of algae in the water. So we're looking at nutrient bioextraction properties of the farmed seaweed. There's also the potential for farmed seaweed to contribute to true carbon sequestration. So the ocean acidification problem that is fixed by farmed seaweed is just a local centralized impact, but it doesn't solve climate change per se. However, if it is true that something like 11% of the farmed seaweed naturally sort of sloughs or falls off as the seaweed grows and ages and parts of it senesce, then when those pieces fall off and get buried into marine sediments below the farm, they may become truly sequestered or locked away out of the global carbon cycle. And thus that's an act of carbon removal through the farming seaweed. We're still working on developing a lot of tools to discern to what extent this is true in farmed seaweeds and what the rates might be, to see if seaweed farmers could actually earn a revenue stream from the carbon markets for that process. Finally, there's evidence of farmed seaweed's ability to dampen storm damage to coastlines. And so that adds the resilience of coastal Maine through the act of farming. That's just the act of farming itself and the superpowers that seaweed contain in that act. But there's a whole other side to it. What do you do with that seaweed once it's been harvested? Well, seaweed can obviously, as Bri has demonstrated quite well, be a powerful food product for people. It's got nutritionist value, but its power is also through replacing other land-based agricultural foodstuffs that require a lot more water, a lot more tillable land and other natural resources to produce. And so this is one example of how growing seaweed and using seaweed in supply chains actually avoids carbon emissions elsewhere. Some other quick examples of avoiding carbon emissions are through bioenergy production and using seaweed as a feedstock in anaerobic digestion, using seaweed as a biochar, which can be a stimulant to soil productivity that can help soil sequester more carbon itself and aid in plant productivity. It can be used to replace plastics that are based on fuels as well. And then finally, some of the more recent research that we've gotten funded is to look at using seaweed as a livestock feed and avoiding methane emissions from ruminants, like in dairy cow production, in beef production, or even in wool production. So that's a quick run through of the different ways that seaweed has superpowers when you produce it and when you use it.
Truly amazing. Thank you so much, Nichole. So Bri, as on the economic development side of things, you probably approach seaweed slightly differently. And while we know there is a lot of support in Maine for local food, what are some of the challenges facing aquaculture businesses in Maine in accessing kind of this local food market?
Yeah, and I mean, I think for just on one of the questions you asked the other two panelists about the superpowers, I think that the climate mitigation part of seaweed is very important. But I actually feel like the adaptation powers that it has are more substantial, simply because we need to mix adaptation and mitigation strategies every single day. We often talk about, you know, the climate change conversation shifts from mitigation for a few years, then adaptation for a few years, then back and forth. We need to talk about both. And all the seaweed in the world is not going to reverse climate change. But it is the best food you can eat. And importantly, on the coast, it can help mitigate some of the effects of climate change, and it can help people adapt to climate change. And this gets to your point, Sam, about, you know, what are some of the access problems? For us on the coast of Maine, we have 4,000 plus lobster license holders, most of whom are not fishing much in the winter, if at all. And they have equipment that is very easily transferable to kelp farming. So what we do is we make all of the seeds in our nursery. We give those seeds to all of our partner farmers for free, and then we guarantee purchase of everything that they grow. And with that, what we hope to do and what we have been doing, we now have 27 partner farmers with 11 more in the queue with the DMR right now to get leases. The idea is that we help provide a supplemental income source in the off season that can absorb some of the shock of the lobster fishery. Because again, we can plant all the seaweed in the world. The lobster fishery is still increasingly vulnerable because of climate change. And so some of the barriers that we see are, maybe even some of the people who support the Island Institute, is that people have this view of aquaculture that can be very dated and pretty problematic about what aquaculture really is. And for us here in the state of Maine, aquaculture is hope. Aquaculture is hope in the face of otherwise some pretty scary situations. We are looking at a vulnerable fishery. We're looking at the depletion of groundfish, over the past 40, 50, 100 years. And so that is no longer a viable industry on a large scale. And so with lobster, it is doing really well right now for the most part. So people have the capital to invest in a way to adapt, but we can't do that. And we can't have this alternative supplemental income source. We can't grow the aquaculture industry if people oppose seeing a mussel farm or an oyster farm or a kelp farm right outside their house. So, we're just kind of calling on everyone on the coast to join us, to join Susie, to join Nichole, and not only like combating climate change, but helping our coast adapt and be stronger and more resilient during it.
Great, thanks so much, Bree. So we as citizens of Maine's coast can help leverage our superpowers to ensure that seaweed aquaculture has a place on our coast. So remember this, go and support your local seaweed farmer, not only buying their products, but supporting their pursuit of diversifying their income along Maine's coast. Thank you so much for that, Bree. So this is intended to be a community conversation. So I would love to now open it up to all of our attendees who have been putting some questions into the question and answer tab. I encourage you to continue doing so, but I will go through a couple of these right now and just put them to our panelists, and hopefully we can get everyone's questions answered today. So to start, and probably a question for either you, Nichole, or you, Susie, and feel free to tag team as you see fit. Exactly how does ocean acidification affect kelp and seaweed?
Do you want me to go ahead and take that, Susie? I will. So it depends on the seaweed species, but what seaweeds do is they use carbon dioxide to perform photosynthesis, just like land plants, although not just like land plants, because some species of seaweed use carbon dioxide, some use bicarbonate as that inorganic source of carbon. The seaweeds that are stuck using just bicarbonate and can't use CO2 directly aren't as benefited by the CO2 fertilization as the ones who can use it directly. And so we think that especially sugar kelp is one that is highly sensitive to the concentration of CO2, and thus when it's more available due to ocean acidification, they are able to just harness that extra CO2 and grow quite a bit faster. If you're unfamiliar with the growth rates of kelp, they're pretty phenomenal. So they start out just about this time of year is when the schools are getting developed for seaweed, and they are microscopic, barely visible to the naked eye on those lines before they get put in the ocean. And then 6 months later, they're as long as the room that you're sitting in now. They're quite large. So that's a lot of building blocks taken out of the water column, and especially carbon used to make that tissue.
Great, thank you, Nichole. So following up on some of the applications in Superpowers of Seaweed, is there a model for seaweed, for kelp, that exists around utilizing it as carbon credits because it sequesters some amount of carbon? Is there a market? Does Europe have a model like this? Is there a model out there that can connect kelp and seaweed aquaculture to carbon credits? Maybe.
All three of us on the panel, Bree, Susie, and myself, are part of a large program called Oceans 2050, which is a multinational research program looking at the ability for farmed seaweeds, kelp, and other species to sequester carbon in the soil, in the marine soils beneath them. That international group is working on a concept paper, which is the first stage of the process in voluntary carbon markets, to establish the methodology that would allow people to earn that carbon credit. That is going to be submitted to Verra, which is the carbon crediting institution. There are others out there, though, that are also considering entertaining seaweeds as part of the blue carbon market.
I think I would just add to what Nichole said. There's still no data out there really about what we are sequestering. And it's something that we call at our business the S word. And I won't let anybody say it, because it's, you know, we know all of the things that Susie and Nichole said about, you know, local mitigation is really important in our local ecosystem. But there are some superpowers of seaweed that are fairly overblown right now. And we don't know about the sequestration benefits. We do know that, you know, your body's not like a permanent carbon store. So when somebody eats it, it doesn't just necessarily stay in their body. So while there's a lot of local effects and it's really important, we need to also be careful not to overstate the benefits. And in fact, the superpowers are good enough too. Like there's other, hopefully we'll learn more from this Oceans 2050 piece, but the fact that like it's grown with no arable land, no water, no fresh water, no pesticides, no inputs, and it locally helps to mitigate some of the effects of ocean acidification. And it's one of the most nutrient dense foods on the planet. Like, do we need another and right now? So I have actually given quite a few interviews right now on how the blue carbon market is jumping out in front of the science. And I think we just need to make sure that we're careful when we talk about the superpowers of seaweed, and Nichole and Susie absolutely always are, but there are people that are talking about it way ahead of what we actually know what it does.
Great, thank you for that, Bree. And digging in a little bit more to the superpowers that we are well aware of, Bree, could I ask you to talk a little bit more about the type of products that kelp finds its way into? And also, are there opportunities for seaweeds, kelps included, to replace other foodstuffs in our normal diet?
Yeah, right now our motto is kelp on everything. So we want it to be on everything that you eat. It certainly does replace many other green vegetables in our case, but in many parts of the rest of the world, it's replacing vegetables, it's replacing some proteins, it's replacing fish. There's a lot of different ways that people use it. Right here in the States, what we're trying to do with our product line and with our ingredient line that we're getting into other people's CPG products is basically, and CPG means consumer packaged goods, so things that other people eat. What we're really trying to do is make it taste as mild as possible and as replaceable like a green bean or a pea. It is the fastest growing market in the United States. And it's one of the fastest growing food categories in the last 15 years in the United States. That's all dried and it's all imported. And so, you know, anyone who knows anyone under the age of 30, those people are like snacking on seaweed snacks constantly. It's like when I was growing up, the idea of sushi was like the grossest thing ever. Now it's in every grocery store. You can find it in Presque Isle. There's 2 sushi restaurants. And so, you know, like seaweed is everywhere now. Where it's not is outside the sushi category or the snack category. So there's a lot of room to grow for this market. And we're excited to be on the cutting edge of that. But there are others behind us that are also working on really cool products and kind of getting out of those aisles and really getting seaweed everywhere within the grocery aisles.
Great, thank you so much, Bree. I can share that since I brought my first piece of Maine kelp home to my then 2-year-old, I have a 9-year-old that has been seeking it out as a snack and as an ingredient to many a meal since then. So it's an amazing food product and people should be utilizing it more. Susie, if I could turn a question to you. I have an interesting question, wondering if there's any correlation, and if so, to discuss the correlation between the warming temperatures that we are seeing in the Gulf of Maine and acidification.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a very complicated answer, which I'll do my best. So one of the partners from the University of New Hampshire that Nichole and I have been working closely with published a paper a couple of years ago that basically showed that the warming of the Gulf of Maine is providing some buffer to, maybe that's not the right word to use, providing some amelioration to acidification. There's some complex language around omega aragonite and how warming temperatures impacts omega that maybe Nichole could provide some more specificity on. But in short, the outcome of that paper that Joe Salisbury was the lead author on showed that we have been, maybe this is the only benefit of the Gulf of Maine warming, but there has been some amelioration of the impacts of acidification because of our rapid rate of warming. And Nichole, if you have anything else to add, please feel free.
Yeah, I think it's the simplest way to remind ourselves is that colder waters are naturally far more acidic. And so as the temperature is rising here, it's also slowing down that relative acidification process in the Gulf of Maine. So it is kind of a complex thing, or masks it. I think that's just the simplest way to think about it. Colder water is naturally more acidic.
Great, thank you all. So one of the questions is a great one, I think, one of the early questions we got on. So it mentioned this in the film. The question is, are oysters or mussels or scallops currently being grown for market in kelp pens or in association with kelp pens? And if so, where can folks find those products? So I guess Susie, Nichole, Bree, I'll defer to you on who to answer this, but I think Matt would be willing to answer this question as well.
Sorry, the first part of your question I missed.
Sorry, Bree. So are oysters or mussels or scallops currently being grown for sale in the market in association with kelp or in kelp pens, as the question refers to them?
Yeah, so we work with 27 partner farmers along the coast of Maine, and we produce around 86% of the line-grown seaweed in the United States last year. And one of our partner farmers, Matt Moretti, who was featured in the video from Bangs Island Mussels, as per the study that Nichole and Susie spoke about, he's, primarily a mussel farmer and secondarily a kelp farmer. And as far as I know, in Maine, that is the only one that we have that's co-locating the farms. It's being done on a super artisanal scale elsewhere in the United States, but nowhere outside of like a couple thousand feet a line, like, nothing on a real scale. So, we're definitely excited to see the growth of those industries together. Most of the time, oysters don't grow in the same areas as kelp. They're just different depths, but mussels and scallops, there's certainly a tremendous opportunity to get the benefits that Nichole and Susie already spoke about. And they're obviously really awesome quality products for the market as well.
I'd further add that there's a push for co-locating mussels and kelp in New Zealand, a pretty large one actually, to do that there. And many of the leases that are operating in Maine for aquaculture are already approved for both seaweed and shellfish species. And so the possibility of farmers growing them together is sort of there at their fingertips if they'd like to.
Great, thank you all. So we have a question coming in around the scale of aquaculture and its ability to play a role in providing diversified livelihoods for the coast. So I'm wondering if the panel could talk a little bit about the scale of aquaculture, and in particular, if there is a model of sole proprietorship that is seen in the lobster fishery that is transferable outside of that fishery.
I'm happy to speak on this. I'm on the board of the Maine Aquaculture Association, the advisory committee with the Department of Marine Resources. And I have to say that for both of those organizations, and just as a farmer in general, these kind of assumptions about big is bad and small is good is exactly the way that we're going to kill aquaculture in the state of Maine. It's how it's happened in almost every other state. I saw a comment here about Washington State and how there's only one farm. There's a reason for that. It's because people said, we don't want no large scale aquaculture. It's going to really destroy our coast. What that means is there's no aquaculture at all. There's no diversification opportunity. There's no diversification income. One of the reasons that the people we work with make money is because we're an aggregator. So any one of those 27 farms alone, if they had to do the processing, the farming, the labeling, the selling and the marketing, they wouldn't make any money. We've invested $5 million just in our processing, and marketing, that's it. And so that investment has made it so that these partner farmers can just farm, and we give them free seeds, so they're not paying for it. We pick it up at the dock, we run the trucks, we buy them the bags. That is the only reason they can make money. And if you don't have that aggregator, it's a scale game. If you have 3 mussel rafts, you will lose money every year. If you have 7 mussel rafts, you'll probably still lose money every year. Maybe at 20, maybe at 15. So this idea of scale is really us saying, we'd really like you all to be super poor on the coast if you get into aquaculture, because that looks better to us. And that is a very, very, very dangerous start. We need to understand small business owners, if they don't make money, the economy doesn't exist. And so we kind of keep, in the state of Maine, keep sort of saying big is bad. But, we can fit all the aquaculture in Maine, in 2 Portland jet ports. That's including all the salmon. We don't have an aquaculture industry. And so I think it's just really important when we ask ourselves those questions, things that sound good, like owner operator, are actually just making sure that we don't have any economic development in this sector along the coast. The only reason it works for our partner farmers to be owner operators is because we've made millions and millions of dollars of investment, not only in them by giving them free seed and transportation and everything else, but because we own trucks, because we own a 27,000 square foot facility, because we do all the marketing, because we do all the sales. And I think that's just a really important thing for people to come in mind. Your local oyster farmer with 50,000 oysters isn't making any money.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Bree is saying. I feel really strongly about scaling up to the point where you can pay a decent wage, that you can afford to have employees, and you can give those employees health insurance and other benefits that we come to expect. So I think that's a really important point. Thanks, Bree.
Yes, thank you, Bree, for bringing that to light.
If I could just add one more thought, it's pretty clear that most of our coastline is currently experiencing a social carrying capacity because of some of this pushback, but we're nowhere near our ecological carrying capacity for aquaculture. We do have room to grow, lots of room. Our coast is 50 miles longer than California, for instance.
And I think with that, we also have an overqualified workforce. We have all these fishermen along the coast. And to answer another question here about lobstermen pushback, I don't see a lot of pushback on seaweed, and there's 2 reasons. One is because they own the industry. Like I said, they produce 85% of the seaweed in America is Maine fishermen. So that's one. But number 2, it's in the winter, so it's really counter seasonal to fishing.
Great, thank you. Very, very good points all. Nichole, actually, I'm not sure who this is best positioned to. I'll kind of leave it out there for folks to answer. Are there any rough figures so far about how much dried seaweed and what types of species may be needed by livestock to make a real difference in methane production? This is another topic that we see a lot about nowadays.
There's some numbers for certain species, but the funding we've just received to do more research is to really broaden the exploration of the types of seaweeds that could be used, and then get numbers for those species as well, and what the relative reduction in methane emissions will be. The one species of interest is not a native Maine seaweed species. It's actually from the tropics. It's called Asparagopsis, either species taxiformis or armata. And that has been shown to reduce methane emissions in cows by 50 to over 80% in live animal trials. And the inclusion rates are as little as 0.1 to 2% of the total dry matter intake of the cow. So this is, let's see, a cow eats about 45 pounds of feed a day. And so if it's 1%, that is well under a pound, I guess, per cow. Even so, when you add up that there are, I think, 9 billion cows on the planet. That's still a lot of seaweed. And so we need to find lots of species and regional solutions for how that could work, and at least start to chip away at those methane emissions.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to combine a couple questions here. Could you, Susie, Bree, Nichole, talk about kind of the parameters, environmental parameters that are needed for kelp to grow, water depth, water temperature, et cetera. And also combining that with another question, a member of our audience witnessed a significant decline in kelp beds in California because of purple urchins and also because of warming water temperatures. Are there threats like that that potentially could impact kelp here in the Gulf of Maine?
I'll let the scientists speak about the wild beds, but as far as growing conditions, Maine is sort of perfect for it. It's nice and cold in the winter, and wild kelp grows better when it's slightly warmer and pretty sunny. When it gets too warm, it gets pretty fouled. We're currently adapting to the prospect of a warming climate by recognizing that we're going to have shorter growing seasons in the future. But so that's the perfect area for that. We're usually growing between 30 and 50 foot depth. The lines are about 7 feet underwater, so you can't really see the farm. All you can see is some moorings on the farm in the middle of the winter. And we seed them out between October and December and harvest in the Casco Bay starting the end of March and up in Eastport by the 3rd week of June, excuse me. If we left it in the water longer than that, it would definitely get too warm. We really look at like energy on the site, which helps with kind of like the nutrients, the flow, but not too much energy, because then you have to buy huge chains and really large moorings to keep everything in place. So there's a little bit of science to it. Seaweed will really kind of grow everywhere. If you give it a chance, it's just how good of a product it's going to be and how unfouled it's going to be, but it will grow pretty much anywhere up here.
I guess just to add to that, I think it will grow anywhere where it's not being eaten. And so the Gulf of Maine used to have a plentiful green sea urchin population, which was a classic boom and bust fishery back in the 80s. So previous to that fishery, there was a nice balance in the ecosystem between this herbivore and the seaweeds on the seafloor that it ate. And then we overharvested those urchins quite dramatically, and they haven't come back. So where you see sea urchins when you're diving, you don't generally see a lot of seaweed. You see like a pavement of pink, which is a coralline alga. And where there are sea urchins left, where there are no longer sea urchins left, then you see a robust composition of various seaweeds on the seafloor, including kelp. So something like what has happened in California has kind of already happened here, and then so there is a similar story here to the urchin and seaweed story of California.
Great, thanks all. So Bree, probably a question best aimed at you initially. We're talking about kelp. Is this processed locally here in Maine, or is it shipped elsewhere and returned to the coast as a usable product?
It is not. Everything's processed here in Maine, and we just moved from a 6,000 square foot facility in Saco to a 27,000 square foot facility in Biddeford. Unfortunately, we weren't able to afford anything on the ocean, which stinks for our nursery, which goes back to stuff that the Island Institute does about preserving working waterfronts and keeping waterfront properties cheap, because down here in southern Maine, that doesn't exist a whole lot. But we are in Biddeford now, and we should be completed in 3 weeks. So we do everything in Maine, and the customers from all over the country pick up in Maine, and it's distributed in all 50 states. We're now in Hawaii too.
Wonderful. What type of places can people find some of your products, Bree?
Oh, thank you for the commercial ability. If you look on our website, AtlanticSeaFarms.com, there's a store finder on that, and you can see where the products are closest to you. We're in Whole Foods National, Sprouts National, Wegmans, Mom's, and most natural and co-op grocers on the East and West Coast. We're still getting to the middle of the country for the natural co-op grocers, but look for our fermented seaweed salad, our smoothie cubes, or our ready cut kelp. And if you don't see it, please ask for the folks to bring it into the store.
It's great. They're all great products. I encourage everyone to try them if they haven't already. So I guess for you, Susie, and I can happily back up some of this answer as well. What is the Island Institute currently doing or going to do to promote the co-location, co-growing of seaweed and mussels or scallops among aquaculturists in Maine?
What are we going to promote it? Is that the question?
I guess how have we supported this work and this type of work in the past, and how are we going to be doing this into the future?
Well, I mean, I think number one is to continue the work that we're doing with Bangs Island with Nichole and with other scientists and industry members who are interested in participating in co-location research. A big part of my job is communications around the science that we've been researching. So sharing that information with the Governor's Climate Council and sharing the information to date that we have found around our work off of the farm off of Shabig, just sharing that more broadly with industry. I mean, I think that one thing that the Island Institute hopefully will have an impact on is helping more people get into mussel farming. It's very capital intensive. And so that's a roadblock for a lot of people. Like Bree was saying, in order to be profitable in that industry, you really need to scale up significantly. And to do that it costs a lot of money. So anything that we can do to remove some of those barriers to entry, I think is something that would be helpful.
Great. Thank you, Susie. So I'll put this same question to everyone here because I think each will have somewhat distinct answers. Are there opportunities for folks to get involved in aquaculture through internships or through volunteering, even if they don't have a background in science or commercial fishing or lobstering?
We get emails maybe for a day asking us if they can be kelp farmers, asking us if they can be in our nursery. And we always say, like, you know, go sit on a boat in the middle of February and don't move for 8 hours, and also invest in a 35-foot boat and do it all without gloves and tell us if you like it. I think right now there's a lot of romance for people to get on the water and farm. Again, as far as seaweed goes, in my view, with 4,000 plus lobster license holders, there's people that are better suited to do it than a normal entrepreneur, and they already have the equipment. And so the barrier to entry for our partner farmers for lobstermen on the coast is significantly decreased. And they already know how to do it, like year 1 year of like 2 days on the water with our supply manager, and they've got it. Like all the skills are already there. So we always say to people, like, first of all, go on the water and check it out, see if you like it. But the other one is, you don't have to be a kelp farmer to grow kelp. And I think that this is a really key piece for aquaculture. Like, every single person on this call can help aquaculture. They can go out, they can buy these products, they can serve them at dinners, they can advocate, they can show up at lease hearings, not because it's going to affect them one way or another, but just to go and say, I support this because I support the growth of aquaculture in Maine. You know, donate to the Island Institute. And I don't work for the Island Institute anymore, but, you know, like, figure out ways that you can be in aquaculture. It's going to be a lot more helpful to the industry. Right now, the Department of Marine Resources is pretty jammed up with applications of people who think it would be really fun to farm oysters, and they have not a clue of what they're doing, quite frankly. And to us in aquaculture, who are not doing it as a hobby, but are really trying to make a career out of it, everyone on this call and everyone in Maine can be an advocate to grow the industry. And that's what I would say. Like, so great if you want to get into aquaculture. Start at the bottom, go work on one of the boats, figure out how you like it, then go from there, and or really support the industry by actively showing up and supporting the industry and buying our products. I say our as far as Maine aquaculture, it's not Atlantic Sea Farms specifically.
Great. Thank you, Bree. Nichole, you wanted to jump in?
Sure. I would echo what Bree said. I would say that Both Bigelow and Island Institute are 501c3s, nonprofit institutions. So if you want to donate to either one, that would be lovely. The Center for Seafood Solutions.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Nichole. I totally forgot you could also donate to Bigelow.
Research is expensive, so we can always use some more funds to keep that research going. If you are a student and you want to intern, we do have opportunities at Bigelow too. So we have opportunities at many levels. We have our Bigelow Orders of Magnitude or Bloom program, where we do middle school teacher training and high school immersion experiences. And those have both been recently revamped to now include seaweed aquaculture as part of the course curricula. So that's something sort of new that we're doing. And then Bigelow has the summer research internship program as well that has a lot of aquaculture opportunities, and specifically the Center for Seafood Solutions offers an internship that is specific to aquaculture related questions in Maine. And so look out to the Bigelow website for those internship opportunities.
Great, thanks. And I'll also add that the Island Institute has some internship opportunities as well. And feel free to check out our website if you're interested in engaging more in our work on aquaculture or working waterfront preservation or broadly in the blue economy. We're going to combine a couple questions here, and I want to make sure I leave enough time for a few more, one in particular. But so are there variations in sugar kelp's nutritional properties from farm to farm or from year to year? And also connected to this, because of seaweed's iodine content, is there a limitation to how much seaweed should be consumed? And also kind of all part and parcel of the same question is, are products or is kelp tested for heavy metals or other toxins as part of the process?
It's a big set of questions, and there's a few I don't knows in there, but certainly yes, heavy metals are tested in every lot. We test constantly, and one of the main reasons we test is because our heavy metal content is significantly lower than all the imported seaweeds as well as the Pacific seaweeds. There's a number of reasons for that. Obviously, the water is super clean, but we're also growing in the water on the top of the water column during the winter in a very short period of time. So we supply to nutraceuticals, we supply to face creams, we supply to all these things. So heavy metals testing is a really important aspect of that. There is variation in the farms from April to June. And the reason I said there's some I don't knows in that is we don't have the cash to test for all the things that we want to. And so there's still, a lot of questions. We would love to do nutritional tests from every farm, from every month. Each panel costs about $1,500, and that's a line item we certainly don't have in our budget, but we would love to do that. We've applied for several grants to try to do just that, to better understand the differences by farm, by month, and by year, but we just simply don't have the cash to do that right now. It would be great to better understand that. There was another question there that I feel like I missed.
Well, actually, if I could hop in, since we're short on time, I really need to mention that the National Institute of Standards and Technology this January is opening a round robin test for any of the labs, Bree, that you may be sending your seaweed to get tested, to participate on a global scale, because there is an extreme shortage of standardized certified reference material of seaweed. And so NIST, through this process, is going to develop that certified reference material, and then through the voluntary participation of all these labs, set a standard of norms for how to make those measurements so that you can go to a lab and be certain that their number values that they're giving you are accurate and precise, because that's also sort of a limitation in this field.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
Great, thank you all. So there's an interesting question that kind of brings us back to some of the content of the video. And so in terms of the halo effect of kelp, how big is this halo? What did the research show? If, for example, the shellfish were growing in a cove, how far out could you cite a kelp farm? And is the halo effect, did the research look into the halo effect how big the halo effect would be based on individual species of seaweeds or sea vegetables, or did it look only at one species?
We think those are such fantastic questions. That is exactly why we got the next round of funding to study. So that's why we're moving to Alaska and to Norway also, to look at different size farms, different combinations of seaweeds. What we found in Maine was the halo effect is pretty tightly tied to where that seaweed is, but we also could see it shifting like an amoeba around the farm in conjunction with the moving tides. And so we do think there's a nice correlation there between water movement, and we're just looking to really parameterize that so that we can give a seaweed farmer an idea of what their halo should look like if you know enough about the flow regime in that field.
Yeah, we're really excited to be working with Matt at Bangs Island because of the fact that he is co-locating these two species, and with instruments at various locations in and around his farm, we can test that more specifically. So we're hopefully going to have some more data to be able to inform a seaweed farmer or a mussel farmer how close they need to keep the seaweed to their mussels. Obviously, it's going to depend on the hydrodynamics of every site, but we should be able to begin to get at those questions.
Wonderful. So building off of this question, there was another question around the setup of kelp farms and seaweed farms. Are there technological or regulatory barriers to the structure and shape of a seaweed farm that may limit them? The question was really around, are there ways to kind of maximize the carbon mitigation benefits of a kelp farm by better designing it to fit in with the natural environment?
I don't think there's any regulatory limitations. I think right now there's sort of a standard in Maine, but it's not the way that it's farmed necessarily in other countries. So there are ways that you can do it on long lines. Maine's waters are a little bit turbid, so those lower plants, quote unquote plants, would have a hard time getting enough light in Maine, but there's zigzag methods. There's just a lot of opportunity for innovation there, I would say.
I completely agree with Nichole. And I'm not sure it would necessarily have an impact on the carbon piece of it, but certainly on the growth and the efficiency side. And it's something that, you know, it is so new. In 2009 was the first commercial seaweed farm in Maine. And 2018 was the first time it was ever done at scale on any scale in the state. So this is a very new industry, and there are a lot of questions and a lot of improvements to be made.
And kind of a natural follow-up to that question, are there models from either elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in the world that Maine seaweed aquaculture is looking to help inform these types of things?
So I'll say in Maine, people look to the state of Maine as for good regulation in aquaculture. And I, again, like to my earlier point about, I get pretty frustrated on the regulatory side because we're just so slammed as aquaculturists all the time hearing about how awful we are. And so it's like, it almost gets triggering after years of just going to the legislature constantly to try to just fight for your ability to survive as a business. It's less on us. It's more my colleagues doing mussels and oysters and salmon. So we are looked at because our regulatory framework is fair, it's rigorous, and it's extremely strenuous, but it's also very good. It doesn't have baked in issues like if you are a riparian landowner, but you have no use on the water, you don't get to block the aquaculture lease because you don't want to see it. That in other places like Washington or Alaska or whatever, it's actually baked in to the regulation that there is input from people that actually have no inclusion in that process at all, but feel like they have a voice. And so when we talk about, like how the growth of aquaculture should go, it would be as if, like in many of these states, it's as if you're putting up a building in Portland, but someone in Westbrook is able to come and bomb your application. That is what is actually the case in most of the states. So Maine is really looked at as the like gold standard. Alaska just came out with a report in May pointing to Maine's shellfish and seaweed permitting as the gold standard that they want to emulate to be a more effective aquaculture state. So There's no one else here. Maine is the one who did it as far as like really, really good shellfish regulation, shellfish and seaweed regulation. But most of Europe, most of Asia has much more forward-thinking aquaculture laws than we do. You can go anywhere in France, the Netherlands, Norway, Ireland, like these places have extremely progressive, forward-thinking aquaculture regulations. They've been around for hundreds and hundreds of years too. It's not new. It's not a new industry. It's just new to us.
And those nations also have a lot larger federal investment in the R&D needed to build aquaculture as well.
Yeah, I think like that's a great, like, while they're like, we have all this money from our like Norway, they're always talking about how much money they have from their government. I'm like, oh my God, I end up spending like a month of my March just fighting off legislators who are trying to end aquaculture. And meanwhile, Norway is putting in millions and millions of dollars to like try out a new mooring. Like, it's just, we are so far behind in the United States to the rest of the world on this work.
Well, I hope Maine can continue its position of leadership in this country and continue to blaze a trail utilizing the superpowers of seaweed. Dr. Susie Arnold, Dr. Nichole Price, Bree, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for being part of these conversations. I know we couldn't get to everyone's questions tonight. We will do our best to provide in the follow-up email answers to some of the questions that remained. And just so everyone has our wonderful panelists' contact information, I'm going to share my screen again. And I encourage everyone to reach out to us all if you have any follow-on questions that we don't get answered in the follow-up email. There will be an email with a link to the webinar. I'm hoping an additional link to the video to encourage those of you who haven't had a chance to see it yet to watch it again. And again, thank you all. But before we leave, this work is made possible by the generous support of a lot of folks, our members included. But our webinar series is brought to you by Bangor Savings Bank, Eaton Peabody, Spectrum, and the Page Gallery. But most importantly, it's brought to us by our members and the folks that care about Maine's coast. So if you are not a member, I encourage you to go to the Island Institute's website, islandinstitute.org, to learn more about our programming, contact us directly, and to become a member and to support this great work. I encourage you to do the same to Bigelow Labs. And if you're interested in investment opportunities, please call up Bree, because there's a lot of growth potential within seaweed aquaculture here in Maine. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you again to our panelists, and we look forward to talking to you all soon.